So I recently completed the Certified Functional Medicine Practitioner program with Functional Medicine University, and I thought now would be a good time to make a video on what functional medicine is and to give a bit of a review of the program I took. Since the program is really only relevant to health professionals, I'll place the review of the program in a separate video. Now, if we look at the Wikipedia article, it says that functional medicine is an unproven pseudoscience. And I would like to refute that. When we think of pseudoscience, we think of something that sounds scientific but really has no foundation. And I feel that functional medicine attempts to be extremely scientific. Perhaps the one of the flaws is it tries to be on the cutting edge of research, and there's really not enough research to confidently say anything. Now, I also find, though, that being said, that many functional medicine practitioners seemed prone to paranoia and falling for these unscientific causes or treatments. They're just trying to look for any possible cause, and maybe it's that, maybe it's that, maybe it's that, maybe it's that, and they can really go off the rails. The field, if you can call it that, is made up of PhD researchers doing cutting edge research. Medical doctors also involved in research and in the practice of functional medicine. Sometimes functional medicine is also practiced by chiropractors and naturopaths. Many university clinical nutrition programs, their master's programs, they're relabeling them. Instead of clinical nutrition, they're now calling them, clinical nutrition and functional medicine, or just completely relabeling them as functional medicine. Because nutrition makes up a good part of what functional medicine is about, which is about how the body functions. What does the body need to function? Nutrition. So, of course, there's a really strong connection between the two. Some look at functional medicine as a movement in healthcare, and they describe functional medicine as, just the best practices in allopathic medicine, and that what we're doing in functional medicine will be, or should be, standard medicine in the future. So what is it already? Right? So I'll try to give you my definition from my perspective. It's looking at how the systems of the body interact to determine the cause of a patient's symptoms. That sounds great, right? That sounds like medicine, right? It typically involves applying research or treatments based on preliminary research, though. There's often not a ton of research about functional medicine. Functional medicine typically involves many, 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 many tests, right? Because you have to, the body is very, very complex. So they're trying to figure out, one of the possible causes, right? This field of medicine is excellent for outliers, because standard medicine is great for the average person, but none of us are the average person. So they look for all the weird conditions it could be, the rare diseases. So it involves all these tests. There's breath tests, saliva tests, urine tests, fecal tests, blood tests. And these aren't necessarily your standard blood tests. They're not necessarily your standard urine tests. They test for metabolism function, hormones, for infections, for mycotoxins, that's mold toxins, heavy metals, other types of toxins, genetic mutations, and more. Some of these tests are so new, they're only offered in a couple places in the entire country. And this can get very expensive. That's one of the downsides of functional medicine. The doctor also spends a lot more time on each case, right? He has all these tests. He has to put all the information together. He puts on his detective hat, trying to figure out what's wrong. So he might spend 30 to 60 minutes on a case instead of 5 minutes, right? So if the doctor's spending more time, the doctor will need to be compensated, right? Now, sometimes the solution is a bit more obvious if you're doing all the testing, mercury poisoning or a parasitic infection. And sometimes they get the test right away, but there's so many tests, right? You might have to go through rounds and rounds of testing and treatment to find the right test and the right treatment. Maybe there could be dozens of things that are just a bit off on the test. Which are the causes? Which one? Or maybe it's a combination. It's hard to tell. And so sometimes treatments, you have to go through these treatment regimens. Well, let's try a treatment for this. Let's try a treatment for that. So it can be a lengthy process to find a solution. And there's also so many problems to check for. I'll also mention that every practitioner seems to have a favorite or a specialty that they always check first. Some people are like, oh, that problem, everyone's problem is toxic mold exposure. Oh, everyone's problem is an iodine deficiency. Everyone's problem is a gut permeability issue. But then when you look at their treatment protocols, they end up treating a few things at the same time. And then if the person gets better, of course, in their mind, they're attributing all of their problems to the one thing which is their favorite, right? We're human, right? These practitioners are human, and we have our biases. Now, I've watched some lectures where, they're quoting research studies and they go through all these tests. And then I mentioned these practitioners, they can go off the rails and be like, oh yeah, and you gotta make sure they turn their Wi-Fi off, don't hold their cell phone near their head, oh, the G5 towers are going to get them. Like, you got to check for that. Maybe they have to move towns or move houses to get away from the G5 towers. One of them I'm thinking of even said, yeah, there's no research to support, but it must be bad. Right after spending an hour lecturing on, the research that he was doing. So these practitioners are extremely evidence-focused, but they're so focused on finding the tiniest little problems that could cause the patient's symptoms, they can chase shadows, see ghosts, basically. They can see everything as a possible bad thing. And I see a lot of them falling for things with no research behind them, like G5 towers causing disease. Another flaw is, again, they're at the cutting edge, and a lot of the practitioners aren't necessarily skilled at parsing the research. They're reading a lot of research, but they don't necessarily take into account that if these are very preliminary studies with very small treatment groups, these are animal studies, a lot of these studies are in vitro, so the results have to be used with caution. Some of the tests themselves, how accurate are the tests, how useful are the tests? These tests are very new. So, and how useful are they? That will only come with time. Now, I'm really glad functional medicine exists. Again, some functional medicine is just being a normal doctor and doing your job thoroughly, right? It's spending time on the case, like using the most recent research. That should just be normal medicine. Taking a functional medicine program really opened up my eyes to some possible causes of stubborn fatigue or pain. It seems like every practitioner I've heard from has stories of patients suffering for years, finally getting to the bottom of their issue. And we all have heard stories of patients who are like, yeah, I've done this and done this and done this and done this, and the doctors have just given up. They've just given up, and I guess my iron's always going to be low, or I'm always tired, and they've just given up. Now, functional medicine doesn't give up, and I like that. Now, I'm going to cover an example here. This is just an example, just one. And I'll cover a phenomenon called pregnenolone steal. Let's say a patient has a hormone issue with estrogen or testosterone. So let's say it's low. Well, typically what a normal doctor does, the typical normal doctor is, okay, testosterone is low or estrogen is low. Okay, I guess we'll prescribe you testosterone. Right? Problem is it's low. I'll give it to you. Easy. But they're in my opinion, they're thinking too narrow-minded. Why is it low? Right? What is the cause of why it's low? They just go straight to something's low. Let's make it higher. So pregnenolone is the precursor molecule to estrogen and testosterone. And it's also the precursor to cortisol, which is the stress hormone. If the body is stressed, all that pregnenolone can go to cortisol, and then there's not enough of it to go make estrogen, to make testosterone. Progesterone is also there as well. So cortisol, too much cortisol, or too much need for cortisol, can throw off the system. And since it's stealing basically the pregnenolone, that's why it's called pregnenolone steal. Now, if you have an issue with cortisol, that can sometimes be called HPA axis dysfunction, and sometimes also called adrenal fatigue. So we can test cortisol levels and we can test DHEA levels, and there's sort of a graph we can make, and there's different quadrants for how bad the adrenal dysfunction is and the HPA axis dysfunction is. So there could be an issue for that, and then there's treatment protocols for trying to treat the cortisol issues and the issues with that system. And why could cortisol be elevated, though? Emotional stress, trauma, infection, leaky gut, like gut dysbiosis. There's another thing. You can check thyroid function. Maybe, and there's so many people now on thyroid supplementation for hypothyroid symptoms. So maybe they could have an autoimmune thyroiditis related to the elevated levels of cortisol. So instead of supplementing with T4 for the hypothyroidism and the testosterone or estrogen, they could treat the root cause or causes. Let's check out this image, this diagram from a research paper about treating cortisol, basically dysfunction, as a way of treating a thyroid problem. So instead of treating directly the thyroid problem with a supplementation for the thyroid, they treat the HPA axis, the adrenals, and the issue with cortisol. So we can see we should have adrenals, and normal cortisol is anti-inflammatory, but we have this excess cortisol. It inhibits some of the hormones involving the thyroid. Then if you have stressors present, such as food allergies or sensitivities, GI flora imbalance, that can result in reverse T3 being produced, which actually inhibits the thyroid even more. All of this can lead to autoimmune conditions, fatigue, GI symptoms, obviously hypothyroid symptoms, joint and muscle pain. And of course, this study found success in treating for the cortisol issue instead of directly treating the thyroid. Here is a simplified map of human metabolism. Yes, you heard me right. This is a simplified map of human metabolism. A little intimidating, right? There's a lot going on. So let's zoom in here, just to get an idea, where we have one thing turning into another thing, turning into another thing, turning into another thing, and we have enzymes that do that, and each thing is used for other steps. And we also have transporters that need to move one thing to the location that it's going to get processed for the next step. And each of these enzymes, like what creates that enzyme? What's the process of creating this enzyme? What's needed to create this enzyme? What activates this enzyme? Typically, these enzymes get activated or deactivated. So if there's a problem somewhere in metabolism, where the heck could it be? Right? There's so many places it could be, a transporter, and enzymes, and what issue with the enzyme could it be? Actually, since we're here, I see pregnenolone here. So pregnenolone, we can follow it this way, and we end up at testosterone. We can follow it this way, we end up at estradiol, which is the most active form of estrogen. But you can see instead of this path, if we take a detour, we end up at cortisol. So if you're really stressed out, if your body's stressed out, it's pulling all of this in this direction. And, we don't have enough for progesterone, we don't have enough for testosterone, we don't have enough for estradiol, maybe. So your body might not be functioning because it's using all the cortisol for something. And then again, you have to ask the question, well, why is cortisol? Why do we need so much cortisol? So hopefully your functional medicine practitioner doesn't just stop at, well, cortisol is an issue. You have to go beyond that. to try to find why cortisol is such an issue. And here I have a bit of a mind map here of causes of disease. This is from that functional medicine program I took. This sort of hopes to sort of summarize the information and put a lot of the information from the program together. This is not an exhaustive mind map, and I'm not going to go through it, but I just want to show you sort of the size of this map. Right? So causes of disease and treatments, holy heck. It's not easy. And of course, these people who have sort of rare problems, running into a functional medicine practitioner or just your regular doctor doing functional medicine, which means taking their time, ordering more tests, not giving up. I think it's really important. I think functional medicine can really help people who have been suffering for a long time finally get down to the bottom of things. Now, I wish I didn't have to say this, but as I mentioned, functional medicine practitioners, that type of person seems to fall for what I would consider scams, like electromagnetic radiation blockers and charcoal cleanses and some things that have been questionable, some questionable treatments. You have to be a little bit careful about which practitioner you see, and I wish it wasn't that way. I wish you could 100% trust every doctor you run into. But this is also true for your standard medical doctor. I've complained in other videos that corticosteroids should not be used for tendinopathies. That's pretty established in the research. That's not an out there opinion. Another thing, proton pump inhibitors shouldn't be prescribed for long-term use, but a lot of medical doctors do that. You have to always be a little almost critical and careful with your healthcare. You have to sort of be an advocate, and you may have to get second opinions, sadly. I wish the world was a place where things were simple. So I hope you found this informative. I wish you guys all the best. Cheers.